Michael Thompson loved his son Bobby very much and took him to the city park whenever he had a day off. At the park, they usually fed the ducks in the pond and treated the squirrels to some cookies. The little animals never failed to amaze them with their dexterity and grace as they jumped from branch to branch. Bobby enjoyed spending time with his father, who was his role model. The boy wanted to grow up faster so he would be as tall as his dad. However, Bobby really didn't think about the fact that when it happened, he would no longer be a child and would have to start his adult life. In the meantime, the boy could still enjoy his childhood, jumping in the puddles and laughing contagiously. Glancing at his son from time to time, Michael couldn't help but smile. At such moments, the man remembered himself at that age and couldn't resist taking a little trip down memory lane. Michael's childhood wasn't really an easy one, and there were many reasons for it. Bobby's cheerful voice pulled the young father out of his thoughts. "Dad, can I get a soda?" "Sure, go ahead. Just do it yourself, okay? And get yourself a snack too. I'm sure you're already hungry, and dinner is still some time away," Michael answered with a smile. Bobby took the money and ran to the nearest booth selling drinks and pastries. At that moment, Michael's phone started vibrating in his pocket, notifying its owner of an incoming call. The man stepped aside to talk to his colleague and lost sight of his son for a bit. At that moment, Bobby walked up to the booth with all kinds of treats and started checking out the display. Suddenly, the boy's attention got attracted by a soft cough. Bobby turned his head to the right and saw an old man sitting on a bench. The stranger was thin and pale, and feelings of anguish and fatigue were written all over his face. Tears were flowing down the man's cheeks. The little boy couldn't stay indifferent. Bobby looked at the old man in confusion, then stepped closer and said, "Good afternoon, sir. Are you feeling all right? Would you like me to treat you to a soda?" The stranger lifted his tear-stained eyes and looked at the boy. He thought for a second or two and then lowered his head in embarrassment and said, "Thank you. I'd appreciate it." Bobby didn't hesitate even for a second. He immediately handed the vendor his money, which was intended to pay for the drink and the bun he'd chosen. There were tears in the old man's eyes when the boy handed him the food. "Thank you very much. May the angels always protect you," the old man whispered and started eating the bun. Bobby didn't want the old man to feel uncomfortable, so he returned to his father, who just finished talking on the phone. "Dad, there's an old man crying over there. He must be hungry. Let's buy him a piece of pie. I shared my snack with him. You're not mad at me, are you?" the boy asked cautiously. "No, honey, of course not. Why would I be mad at you? You did the right thing. Especially since I'll still buy you what you wanted," Michael answered, ruffling his son's hair. A minute later, they were already standing at the booth. The vendor couldn't help but smile as he handed the boy the same order once again. Meanwhile, Michael approached the man sitting on the bench and, having wished him a pleasant day, carefully sat down next to him. The old man had already finished his bun and was now drinking the water greedily. He wasn't crying anymore. The man looked rather untidy, and it actually seemed like he was experiencing homelessness. The old man's face seemed vaguely familiar to Michael, but the man couldn't remember exactly where he could have seen him before. "You have a good son. I also had a son once, although I was much younger then." The stranger was the first one to break the silence. "Yes, kids are great, aren't they?" Michael answered with a smile. At that moment, he involuntarily looked at the old man's hand and shuddered. There was a purple crescent-shaped scar on the stranger's shriveled hand. Michael looked at it and couldn't believe his eyes. "My mind must be playing tricks on me, or maybe it's just a coincidence," the man thought fervently, unable to take his eyes off the old man's hand. The bottom line was that Michael had seen this scar before, and this realization shocked him. Michael's mind suddenly took him back in time to the days when he was about the same age as Bobby. Memories and images came flooding in, turning into a whole picture of his past. Michael was born into an ordinary family. His father worked in a factory, and his mother was a schoolteacher. Nevertheless, his childhood had the same little joys that all children in the world love so much. Despite the fact that his family didn't have a lot of money, Michael's parents always found a way to buy him gifts, making sure to make his childish dreams come true at least once in a while. The future seemed so predictable to the boy that he mistakenly believed that it would always be so. Everything changed in an instant when Sarah and Jason Thompson got into a terrible car accident that left their son an orphan. Since Michael had no close relatives and distant relatives didn't show any interest in the boy's fate, it seemed that the boy would end up in an orphanage. Having lost his mother and father, Michael didn't realize that his parents had died, and for quite some time, he mistakenly believed that they would come back soon. It was only when the social services placed 5-year-old Michael in an orphanage that he realized that his life would be very different from then on. His mom would never make him peanut butter sandwiches again, and his dad would never show him his collection of vintage baseball cards. From then on, the orphanage would become Michael's home, and other orphans would be his friends. However, the poor boy had no way of knowing that fate had even more trials in store for him, and that they would be a lot more difficult than what he'd already had to face. Not a day went by that Michael didn't dream about getting adopted. However, having lived at the orphanage for 2 years, the boy finally lost faith that it would ever happen. Moreover, older kiddos said that little babies always got adopted first because they couldn't remember or understand anything. But it's true, I'm almost 6 years old. No one's going to adopt me now, Michael thought sadly, unaware that everything would change in the very near future. About a month later, a young couple came to the orphanage. They were looking to adopt a 6 or 7-year-old boy. Having barely glanced at Michael's photo in his personal file, the couple immediately decided that they wanted to adopt him. Dorothy and Stephen Wilson had been married for over 15 years, but they've never been able to have children. Neither doctors nor fertility clinics, nor their expensive treatments could help. The couple saw adoption as their only way out of this situation. They truly believed that a child would change their lives for the better. Therefore, having taken care of the paperwork, Dorothy and Stephen took Michael home a month later. The boy really liked his new family. From his first days at the new home, Michael was surrounded by love and care, which he didn't get at the orphanage. Gradually, memories of his biological parents faded away, leaving a few blurry images and visions in his memory. Dorothy turned out to be a very loving mother who immediately found common ground with Michael. Stephen was just as good a parent as his wife and took an active part in raising the boy. It seemed that the Wilson family was finally going to get the happiness they deserved and longed for so many years. But as it often happens, problems came into the family's life at the moment when they least expected them. First, Dorothy started feeling unwell, and then she got diagnosed with cancer. Then, Stephen started having problems at work because it turned out that the management of the company where he worked was engaged in money laundering. Unfortunately, Michael's adoptive father also got investigated by the IRS, who were very serious about their allegations. This study was widely covered in the press, which was probably the reason why Stephen was taken into custody just a day after the investigation was initiated. This news obviously had a detrimental effect on his wife's health. Worrying for her husband, Dorothy forgot about her own problems for a bit and even stopped getting her treatment, which seemed useless and extremely painful. Of course, refusing to take medication was a mistake that cost the unfortunate woman her life. Dorothy died 3 days before the start of her husband's trial. In fact, Stephen didn't do anything wrong, but his employers deliberately set him up to be their scapegoat in case anything would go wrong. Despite the best efforts of Stephen's lawyer, the jury found him guilty and the judge closed the case, sentencing Stephen to 7 years in prison to be served in the state county jail. Stephen was devastated, but he wasn't even allowed to attend his wife's funeral. He was sent to prison right from the courtroom. Thus, by an evil twist of fate, Michael found himself back at the orphanage. During the time he spent with his new family, the boy grew very attached to Dorothy and Stephen, who became both his parents and his friends. This time around, Michael ended up staying at the orphanage for over 10 years, after which he went out into the real world and ended up living on the street. The man had to go through a lot before he could find his place in this life. In all that time, Stephen never once contacted his adoptive son. Thus, at some point, Michael realized that he'd lost his adoptive father forever. The man thought that Stephen could have died in prison, or maybe he decided to start a new life after serving his sentence, or maybe there was simply no place for his past and his adopted son in it. The only thing that Michael remembered distinctively about his adoptive father was the scar on his right hand. Many years have passed since those tragic events, but there hadn't been a day when the man didn't think of Stephen, who was convicted for another person's misconduct. And now, looking at the homeless man's scar, Michael realized that the old man sitting next to him was Stephen Wilson, whom he hadn't seen in a very long time. "Father, it's me, Michael, the boy from the orphanage." The old man turned pale and, feeling his heart pounding, whispered, "Michael, my boy, how long has it been?" Bobby gasped in surprise and froze in place. "Dad, I didn't realize that you knew this man." "Yes, son, I do know this man. Of course I know him," Michael answered, having a hard time holding back his tears. Stephen was already crying openly, feeling guilty for what had happened to his adopted son. When Stephen got out of prison, he immediately found himself on the sidelines of life. Due to his criminal record, it was nearly impossible for him to find a job, and doing odd jobs didn't bring the man enough income. On top of that, his faithful companion of so many years, his wife Dorothy, was gone, and Stephen was left all alone in this world. Trying to regain his confidence and forget his past, Stephen started drinking, which led to even bigger problems. The man lost his house and couldn't get any work anymore. Having become homeless, he couldn't even think about reclaiming custody of his adopted son. First of all, the old man was afraid to look Michael in the eyes and admit that he turned out to be a bad father, unable to take care of his son. "Please forgive me, Mikey," Stephen whispered and hugged his son. At that moment, Michael thought for the first time in many years that his adoptive father didn't actually deserve getting completely cut out of his life. Little Bobby stood nearby and smiled happily, watching his father and grandfather hugging. The boy was very excited by the fact that he would now have another loved one in his life, a grandfather who would always love and support his grandson. Hand in hand, the trio slowly walked down the shady alley of the park, ready to face any new trials and hardships fate might throw their way.